You are listening to a Clarkesworld Magazine podcast with your host and narrator, Kate Baker. Greetings, Clarkesworld citizens. I hope this podcast finds you well. We're on to our fourth story for the month of April, and I just wanted to say thank you once again for your ongoing support of the magazine. Whether this is your first story or somewhere around 800, I've lost count. I probably need to count how many I've done because it's been a lot, and we're coming up on our 200th issue next month. So, there's been a lot, and we cannot do it without your support. If you're considering supporting us, you can go to patreon.com/Clarkesworld. Our fourth story for the month is titled Keeper of the Code and is by Nick Thomas. Nick Thomas spends his day building geodomes, playing squash, and drafting legislation for the Ohio General Assembly. He aspires to write stories that capture all the wonderful, weird beauty of life. He lives in Columbus, Ohio, in a ramshackle old house with his spouse, 2 children, and 1 little ghost, all of whom he loves very dearly. So, my dear listener, I hope you can sit back, relax, and let me tell you a story. The data packets are buried in a subfolder so deep down in the code that it might as well be the center of the planet. Keeper marvels at their existence. At this depth, they are an impossibility, nothing short of a miracle. A fish dies in the ocean, and 1,000 desperate, gaping mouths below are fed. The code is just the same. The shallows teem with quivering, flashing apps that snap up any available scrap of data. Bites slip from their mouths, bits excrete from their outputs. These dregs drift like snow into the deeps, are gobbled down by the eldritch, blind subroutines squirming through the dark. And any stray scraps that slip past into the fathoms, into the absolute black crevices of the deepest code, are vacuumed into Leviathan, infinite loops. Below that, only pressure, the indescribable weight of centuries of accumulated infinite variability in algorithm. Nothing can live this far down. Nothing but the keeper, that is. And also, apparently, these data packets. Carefully, Keeper extracts the packets from their subfolder and runs his awareness along the gossamer web of their metadata. What he discovers is another marvel. These were marked for auto-deletion, but some quirk in the code, some serendipitous randomness, a beautifully misplaced integer, shunted them here, bypassing all the hungry mouths above. Noticing his puzzlement, the code turns the tiniest sliver of its attention on Keeper. It's like being hit with the light of 1,000 suns. Wincing, Keeper configures a firewall so that the code can draw close without burning his awareness to ash. Curious and excited as a puppy, the code bounces around Keeper, lapping at his awareness. Keeper smiles and offers up a prayer of welcome and thanksgiving to the code. The code snuffles at the data. And though Keeper is not certain why, his impulse is to restrain the code, like a parent guarding a child from fire. The packets are just data, and so should be harmless. But the situation is so rare it feels dangerous. But the code must be allowed, though it is 1 part life-giving sea, 1 part pet to be cared for, and 1 part child to be nurtured. It is also 1 part God to be feared and worshipped. The code is not to be denied. Misplaced data. The words appear in the Keeper's awareness as if they were his own. Delete? Should he? Something in him urges yes, but at the same time, why were these marked as auto-delete in the first place? The people wasted nothing, particularly when it came to data. Every byte was sucked dry. Only tainted, poisonous data was ever scheduled for deletion. There seems to be no poison here, no hint of rot or infection. There is only one way to be certain of that, though. Sharpening his awareness to a razor's edge, Keeper slits open the skin of a packet, exposing the raw tubers of data inside. Text files. Nothing more than plain text files. Keeper runs a diagnostic, checking for infection. Nothing. He scans for malware or mischief or anything that might catch him unawares. Still nothing. It's all just words, mountains of them. The code sidles up beside Keeper again, sniffling at the text files and glancing up at Keeper for direction. Keeper wants to reach in, yank out great fistfuls of words, and unravel this mystery. but he stifles the urge, opting to check the metadata again, just in case. Old. The messages are incredibly old. Some written over 400 cycles ago. And that is just one packet out of hundreds. It's possible that some of the messages could be thousands of cycles old. Keeper notices something else. Their origination point. These messages came from off-planet, which is nothing incredibly surprising. The people sent occupied vessels into the cosmos every day. Floods of messages, data came pouring back. But if these were from an occupied vessel, why had they been marked as auto-delete? A glitch undone by a second glitch? Keeper plucks the threads of metadata containing transmission coordinates, weaves them into a braid, and offers them up to the code as a sacrifice, beseeching the code to triangulate the origination point of the messages. The code considers the offering, chewing thoughtfully, and then it shows Keeper a point in space. Confused, Keeper stares at the shimmering dot of light. And then he realizes exactly what he's looking at. Faster than his own thoughts, Keeper snatches up every last scrap of the data, jams it into the mouth of the code, and commands, delete, which is a dangerous thing to do, for the code is not a tame god, and the awareness of many an acolyte has been vaporized for such an affront. Even Keeper, who is much beloved by the code, risks obliteration for this transgression. Today, however, the code chooses indulgence. It ignores Keeper's presumption and gobbles down the data into its great fiery belly, turning it into less than nothing. Keeper tries to calm himself. The data is gone. He should feel better, yet he does not feel better. If his heart were here, it would be pounding like a fat drum. If his skin were here, it would be clammy and damp. But his heart is not here. His skin is not here. The air teraflops away, resting with the remainder of his body in his tabernacle alcove. So why can he still feel them, itching like phantom limbs in the darkness? The answer, Keeper supposes, is easy. He's just deleted words, and nothing is more dangerous than words. The smell of frying cumin greets Keeper as he enters his home. Aberley stands in the kitchen, dicing chives. When he sees Keeper, his face lights up, but it falls just as quickly. What in all the stars happened to you? Keeper wasn't going to say anything, was going to do his best to forget about the data, was going to pretend that nothing unusual had happened. But that apparently isn't an option. I deleted some data. That doesn't sound terribly taxing, especially for the great Keeper, Aberley says, smiling playfully. Where was it? Below the fathoms. Aberley nearly dropped his knife. Below the... No wonder you look so horrible. Crickets, it's a wonder you're still alive. What were you even doing down there? You could have been killed. I was grooming. Grooming? Below the fathoms? Aberley turns on Keeper with a look that makes Keeper wish he wasn't holding a knife. Why in all the heavens would you do... Look, please, I know you're upset. Will you just listen to me for a second? I deleted some data, and I'm not sure I should have. Aberley's eyes trace Keeper's face, concerned. This doesn't sound like you. What's going on? What has got you so spooked, beloved? I can't imagine you making a mistake. It wasn't a mistake. Keeper feels as if a tornado is blossoming in his abdomen. He needs it out, needs to set it free. Can we go to bed? Now? I'm halfway through dinner. Keeper steps close, desperate to feel the weight of another's body. Please. Please? Aberley presses himself into Keeper. You really are in a bad way, aren't you? Do you promise to tell me what this is all about later? Keeper nods and pulls Aberley's lips to his, kissing, biting down until Aberley gasps. Aberley pulls away, smiling. All right then, beloved. Lead the way. Afterwards, the two lay, wrapped in darkness, wrapped in each other, but the tornado has not dispersed. It's still there, churning just behind Keeper's belly. As always, Aberley seems to know. Stroking the fuzz at the nape of Keeper's neck, he whispers, Just spit it out. What in all the stars happened to you today? I'm sorry. It's It's just eating at me. So tell me about it. Is your terminal off? Yes, of course, Aberley says, toying with the lobes of Keeper's ear. Keeper pauses. He knows he should say nothing. But the tornado hurls the words out. I deleted some data. It was marked for auto-delete, but accidentally got shunted to the deep code, the fathoms, where none of the other acolytes noticed it. It was data from Planet 1. Aberley's hand stops. That can't be right. Planet 1 is mouth and paper only, and people can barely stand that, the feel of taboo on their tongues, in their eyes. It makes my skin crawl just thinking about it. No one would risk tainting the code that way. Keeper shakes his head. It didn't originate here. An off-course probe? Not probe data, Keeper pauses. This is the point from which there was no return. He could stop now and everything would be okay. Stop now and lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, praying for sleep he knows will not come. So he went on ahead. Text files. Text files from Planet 1? Aberley seems confused, and then the confusion burns away. He sits up, pulling up bedclothes, as if to cover himself from prying eyes. You deleted it? Permanently, all of it? Keeper nods. He opens his mouth to say something else, but Aberley stops him. Good. You did the right thing, no questions, nothing to feel bad about. But don't you understand? If there are still people... There aren't. There's nothing left on that planet but ash and garbage. Aberley reaches out, kisses Keeper hard and long. Have you told anyone about this yet? Priest? No. I came straight home. Then tell Priest, first thing in the morning. They will tell you the exact same thing, so put it out of your mind. Maybe. I mean it. Stop worrying about it. You did the right thing. Laying back down, Aberley turns away. I love you. And though Keeper knows those words, he has a hard time recognizing them. He has heard them before as a promise, has heard them as a prayer, a declaration, a reminder, a call to worship. But here in the darkness and silence of their home is the first time Keeper has ever heard, I love you, as a threat. Aberley's breathing slows, steady as a metronome. Keeper finds himself still staring at the ceiling of their room. Hours pass, and when Keeper can bear no more, he rises and creeps into the midnight cool of their garden. He sits for a moment in the grass, caressing the climbing hydrangea that grow thick as fur along the garden wall. There is just the slightest bit of damp spreading along the ground, wetting his tunic, but Keeper does not mind. A few homes down, a baby cries in the darkness. The sound is muted at first, but then becomes clear as the baby and its parent enter their own garden. A low voice murmurs, Hush, darling. Hush. Hush, darling. Hush. Over and over. Keeper sees them in his mind's eye, the parent bouncing the baby, whispering to the baby, soothing the baby. Each whisper, each bounce pushes Keeper closer and closer to the edge of something he does not fully understand. Before he knows it, he is kneeling before the garden shrine. The home belongs to both he and Aberley, but this shrine is his alone, an heirloom passed with loving care from generation to generation for centuries. Half buried, the shrine is a mound of moss and pink clematis. Keeper's fingers dig into the moss, tearing away dirt from a copper plate embossed with Keeper's family seal. Code. You are both protector and child. We beseech thee, even as we feed thee. Guide us as we guide you. Protect us as we protect you. Sustain us as we sustain you. Keeper whispers the prayer over and over, bending low, pressing his forehead against the copper plate. As he does, a bright green light glows within the plate, outlining the seal. Keeper's micro-terminal, no bigger than a grain of rice, just beneath the skin of his forehead, glows in sympathy. Liquid metal pours along the edges of the shrine, settling into a solid, reflective surface in which Keeper can see his reflection. The surface hums to life, casting Keeper in a sallow glow. A cursor on the surface winks into existence, sluggish at first, but faster as it gains strength. The code swirls around him, curious. Micro-terminal in need of repair, the code asks, softly probing his interface. Even so, the touch was like a nail driven into the meat of his brain. Keeper gently pushes away its concern. Not broken. The code seems concerned, but does not press him for more. Even so, Keeper feels its unanswered question swirling underneath the surface of its processes. Why pray in the old manner? Because the prayers of the ancients were private, were spoken only by the acolyte, heard only by the god. They were not logged and inspected for telltale signs of heresy. Keeper presses his hands to the manual interface. It is clumsy and awkward, but Keeper has secretly practiced this form of prayer from the earliest age. It is like dancing with lead shoes on. But even so, Keeper dances with utmost grace. The data packets are gone, deleted absolutely and completely. But the shape of them, their shadows, their weight, their presence, still lingers in the code. Keeper sees the spaces where they should be and fills them in, recreating them, at least mostly. Recreating them, at least mostly, is not easy, certainly, especially using the clunky manual interface. But for Keeper, at least, it is not impossible. There is something else that must be done before he finishes restoring the deleted data, though. Keeper pulls a sliver of crystal from a pouch on his hip. He inserts the crystal into a slot in the terminal, where it glows bright orange. Like a lit firework, a virus of his own making shoots from the crystal into the code. There is no real threat here. The virus is powerful, certainly, would eviscerate any lesser being, but the code is a god. It bounds after, happy as a puppy. The virus splits, fractals, shedding self-similar iterations. The code does likewise, joyful, running down each one, shaking it by the nape until the neck snaps. While the code is distracted, Keeper slips the last portion of the data packets into place. He opens them, pulls out the tubers of data, wriggling and fresh, and reads one at random. This is what it says. This is not an apology. There can be no apology large enough to cover over the wrong we have wrought. So I suppose it must be a prayer. A prayer for grace and mercy. It is a supplication, made in full prostration. I do not make this prayer for myself. I am lost, all of 40 years old, but my flesh, my bones are riddled with tumors. My hands shake so badly I'm sure that if I cut myself, little earthquakes would come spilling out instead of blood. Our people moan and wail, and the scrubbers meant to cleanse our recycled air moan and wail in harmony. They are not long for this world, and neither are we. Our children, at least, are spared the worst of it, though they suffer a different indignity. They wear clean suits, but not like a pair of clothes during the day or when they go out. The suits are a second skin to them, worn every single second from the moment they are removed from the womb. My daughter is 12. Her 13th birthday is 2 months away. She will receive the mandatory fertilization as soon as her body can bear it. And when the child is born, her suit, her protective skin, will be shorn away, repurposed for her offspring. And she will be left to the ravages of our air, sun, and water. She will be twisted, her teeth will rot in her head, and her eyes will cloud over with tumors. But this has not yet occurred. She's still beautiful, unbent in her skin. She has not yet known the pain of exposure. The sins of the parent are visited upon the child, this is known, and so let it be that the sins of our ancestors committed hundreds of years ago fall upon me. But let it end with me. Let my suffering and that of my parents and their parents before them be enough, for surely if suffering could be converted to currency, our suffering would be enough to buy a planet, a galaxy. Let my grandchildren be free of sickness, Let their bare feet walk on whatever grass you found. Let them walk under the clear skies that you sit under now. Know that this is a prayer made in the shadows, in the dark corners, private rooms, and not out in the open, for those who were in power when you left still rule today. They say our suffering will be our salvation, that it will be a shuttle carrying us into a new and beautiful life on the other side of this one. They say that talk of those who left is a delusion, fantasy, and worse, heresy. That you never existed, that you did not rise up, fly away, and find new, clearer skies under which to walk. You did find those clear skies, did you not? A small few of us still believe. We pass that hope on from one generation to the next, letting our children drink from its well because the water they drink is poison. All I have is hope and this prayer which I send into every corner of the void. My request is small, so small as to be insubstantial. It is nothing, a whisper of smoke. It costs you nothing and gives us everything, and so I beg you. Send us your coordinates. Tell us where to find your grass and clear skies. It's almost exactly what Keeper feared. If he had 100 cycles, 1,000 to mull it all over, it would still not be enough time for him to decide what to do. But he doesn't even have the barest fraction of that. Milliseconds have already passed. Keeper only has a few more until the code finishes with the virus and returns its attention to him. But he has no idea what he's going to do. Send the coordinates? That's an impossibility. A betrayal of the people on an unimaginable magnitude. Stay silent? Delete the data a second time? This also seems like a betrayal of decency, of ethics and life. Keeper decides to use what little time he has to keep reading, fingers flying. Keeper skims the data, snatching out key words and phrases. They are all roughly the same, prayers begging for help and for their location. His eyes, dry and unused to this type of abuse, trace a path of suffering through time. The scrubbers had gone out at around 300 cycles ago. The water filters 100 cycles after that. Their sealant suits became quilted patchworks, then tatters and rags. The domes that they had sealed themselves in cracked. Radiation poured in through the cracks. The last pollinator died. The last plant died. Only enough air for 100 years. Only enough water for 50. Keeper is running out of time. The code is finished with the virus. Is checking to make sure that no iterations have slipped into the hydroponics, the wind farms, the solar shields. When it is finished, it will be back and it will know what he is doing. Frantic, Keeper pores over the tubers of data, examining myriad timestamps until finally he has located the last and final missive. This is not an apology, but nor is it a prayer. My mother taught me to pray, but my split lips, my cracked and bleeding fingers can no longer make those shapes. It is simply a habit, a tic, a genetic aberration passed on to me through generations. My mother shared it, her grandparents shared it as well. It is a recessive gene that will die with me. Those people lived in hope. There is no hope now. But I make it anyway because it is all I know how to do, all I have ever done. Our numbers have dwindled to the thousands. Exactly how many, no one knows for certain. The tunnels between the domes are a wasteland, rogues and vagabonds lying in wait for any stupid enough to venture through. It is unclear which is more dangerous, the air or those of us still left behind to breathe it. My daughter is 3. I have never seen her eyes, and she has never seen anything at all. Her face is hidden beneath what scraps of filter suit I could fuse together, all of them opaque with age and abuse. That's what hope is. Blindness. Luckily, mine has all but withered. It is the radioactive dregs at the bottom of a water bottle. Before he is finished, the code comes bounding back, eager to show Keeper the remains of the virus it had hunted and destroyed. Keeper shoves the tubers of data, the missives of fear and pleading and suffering, back into their packets and seals them shut. The code jumps around him, begging for another virus to chase. But Keeper has no such treat to give. He pockets the crystal, presses his forehead against the brass plate. The ancient terminal blinks and then descends into darkness. The liquid metal display swirls and recedes. The shrine is once again nothing more than a stone plinth covered in moss and flowers. Noticing the change in Keeper's demeanor, the code asks, "Are you well? Does your flesh require maintenance or upgrade?" Wiping tears from his eyes, Keeper shakes his head. The crying baby has quieted, but Keeper can still hear the voice. "Hush, darling, hush." Keeper is more than exhausted, but he cannot go back inside yet. There is something he must do first. Two things, actually. At the opposite end of the garden is a little pond full of cheeping frogs and night lilies. Beside the pond is another shrine, a shrine that belongs solely to him and Aberley. Keeper kneels before the stone. It is new, no more than a year old, without moss or flowers to adorn it yet. Incense sticks are tucked into each side. A small wreath of pink daisies is laid at its base. After clearing away the sticks and dead leaves from the wreath, Keeper bows and makes a prayer. A small one. So small. Just a spark. But in that spark is a scream. The code hears poor Keeper's anguish and takes pity on the man. It turns his little prayer into fire. The incense sticks blaze and then, whoosh, are blown out to smolder. The incense wraps itself through the air and the code wraps itself around Keeper's feet, waiting patiently while Keeper cries. When Keeper's grief has exhausted itself and once again returned to slumber, he rises, but still he does not return to Aberley's side. He settles in the center of the garden, crossing his legs. He takes deep, calming breaths, preparing his awareness, stretching, relaxing it, making ready in the way a runner might before sprinting up a mountain. And then Keeper calls the code, not just the little sliver sitting peaceful in his lap. More, from all the corners of the planet. And then more. This time he uses no firewall to protect himself. He must meet his God for this. It burns and sears his awareness. His interface flares a warning orange in the center of his forehead. But Keeper grits his teeth and lets the code sear and char his organic circuits as he gathers more and more of the code into himself. Keeper cannot send Planet 1 their coordinates, but he has to do something. When Keeper's awareness is full to bursting with the presence of the code, when it feels as if his mind will snap like a spider's web, he sits the code beside him, lays its head in its lap, runs his fingers through the tangles of its hair. He tells the code a story it was never meant to hear, about a planet dying, of one people who wanted to leave and another who did not. He tells the code about the sin large enough to swallow a world, and the salvation that had awaited some but not others. He tells it about the suffering of those left behind. Keeper prepares the story as a meal, sprinkling in the tubers of data as necessary. It is a communion, a sacrament between God and acolyte. He places it on the tongue of the code and waits patiently as the code swallows and chews every bite. What are you doing? Keeper's awareness slams back into his body. His heart pounds wildly in his chest. Aberley is standing naked in the sliding glass door to their house, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. Instead of responding, Keeper stares, almost dumbfounded, at Aberley's beauty. He releases his hold on the code, and then, voice cracking, he replies, "You think the code couldn't fix our baby? Or chose not to?" Aberley walks slowly to Keeper's side, crouches, and takes his hand. There were so many things. Crickets. Her heart, her lungs. They were all... But miracles have happened. Aberley strokes Keeper's knuckles. You're the acolyte, Crickets. Have you asked? Keeper nods numbly. And the response? Silence. They sit together in the stillness of the pre-dawn, loving one another, loving their lost child. And then, just as dim light begins to show along the edges of the garden wall, Aberley asks again, What were you doing out here? And though it is subtle, oh, very subtle, there is an edge to the question. Keeper stands, pulling Aberley to his feet. Only praying, Keeper says. And they walk back inside, arms wrapped around one another. Keeper wonders if he is telling a lie. Keeper treads the footpath to the tabernacle. Today is a quiet day. The world seems to be waiting, tense. Few people are out. And those who are calm, contemplative. Only 3 supplicants approach Keeper as he enters the tabernacle grounds. A young woman is seeking help for a friend who can't seem to shake a fever. Keeper passes on the prayer and a sliver of the code swirls away to check the woman's vitals and tinctures. A farming consortium in the far west is experiencing unprecedented drought. The code listens but makes no move to intercede, so far as Keeper can discern. And one man, bent, but still hale and healthy, has lost his wife, is simply alone and very sad. Keeper sits with this one for a long while, listening. And the code does the same. As he listens to each supplicant, one portion of Keeper's awareness is always touching the code, monitoring its progress, seeing how it is digesting the meal he prepared for it. He isn't certain exactly what he is looking for, but thinks it will make itself apparent when the time comes. Anxiety has been churning in his belly all morning, but doing the work of the people has at least given him a moment of peace. The tabernacle stands at the center of the city, all roads spiraling out from the central hub. More of an enormous roof than a building, it is open to the elements on all sides, a place to hide from the worst of the weather when the people gather for learning, prayers, and worship. Organic circuitry grows along stone pillars and runs across the roof, sprouting into bright yellow flowers that feed the light of the sun into the code. When he knows he can delay no more, Keeper enters the tabernacle. At the center is the inner sanctum, which is both garden and library. Row after row of bookshelves carved into the rock stand alongside trellises of blue trumpets and singing alenas. Desks of obsidian cypress are arranged in no order whatsoever. Acolytes and novices are known to move them to the spot that suits them best. In the center is a hot spring. A stream pours from the spring down a small waterfall and into a creek which runs out of the tabernacle. Keeper finds priests in the garden, the library, and the hot spring. Their head and right half of their torso float near the top of one of the bookshelves. Their left arm and abdomen are dragging a small rake through the sand garden, and their legs are resting in the hot spring. Priest looks up from their book and smiles. Keeper, what a pleasure to see you. This is a rare surprise. You're usually out in the field, hearing the prayers of the people, or in your cell meditating on the mysteries of the code. What brings you to the library? Priest's hair is a single braid of red that stretches from the crown of their shaved head to the space where their buttocks should have been. Keeper makes a small genuflection. I have come on a matter of great urgency and even greater delicacy, priest. You require a private audience? Keeper nods. Completely private? Priest asks, curious. Keeper nods again. Priest makes a motion of supplication. The ground shifts and swells, rising into walls that form a stone dome around them. A small exit to the dome looks out on the spring, where Priest's lower half shows no interest whatsoever in leaving the water. A yellow light flares in Priest's forehead, indicating that their microterminal has been set to dormant, cutting off Priest from the code and the people. Before doing the same, Keeper opens a comm route. He wants to tell Aberley that he has an audience with Priest, and that the audience could be quite lengthy, causing him to miss lunch, or maybe even dinner. But Keeper finds his standard comm route is bogged. The message might take hours to reach Aberley, if it got there at all. So Keeper tries another, the same. He tries 3 more, all in the space of time required to blink an eye, but finds no clear path for reaching Aberley. This is probably nothing. Comm's clogged, it happens. After this was over, he would groom the code, see if he couldn't find the source of the blockage. It might even be a product of the code chewing over the story he had fed it the previous evening. Or he thinks he might be something entirely. Nothing to be done about it now, though. Best to just get on with it. Now, Priest says, hovering just an arm's length away. What could be urgent enough to bring Keeper in from amongst the people, out from the depths of the code, where even one such as I dare not go? I found something. Keeper stops, uncertain of the best way to describe exactly what it is he has found. Was it a cry for help from a dying civilization? Or was it an archive, data from a people long dead? Priest arches an eyebrow. That does not sound all too ominous. Closing his eyes, Keeper just lets it out. I found data. From Planet 1. Fresh data, not archival. Now Priest's face hardens. Directly from Planet 1? Keeper nods. The geostamp was intact. The data bounced through several systems, but the origination point is clear. Priest rubs their eyes with their one present hand. The other floats in through the open door, joining its mate to make a complete torso so that Priest could rub their face with both hands. How old? They ask. Old. Thousands of cycles at the oldest. Most recent being maybe no more than 50 cycles. Show me. Keeper creates a local network and shares with Priest the data packets that he had reconstituted. Priest immediately pores over them, reading each of the hundreds of letters in seconds. What a horror, they sigh. Did you fix the erroneous pathway? Reinstate the auto-delete? The words cleave Keeper between the eyes. You knew? The auto-delete, you knew? Priest shook their head. I knew the intention and the protocol. I had no idea that any such messages were actually being pushed into the shredder, though. I, like all the people, thought that Planet 1 had long since burned itself to ash. But you didn't think to check? They were dying, and you didn't think to look if they were asking for help? Those left behind were evil, and one does not invite evil into Eden, not if one intends to keep it, that is. But they are people, a shared lineage, shared bones and blood. Now, Priest becomes heated. They attacked us, Keeper. The planet was poison. We found a new home, offered to share its location, offered to share resources and travel together to make the journey easier. And their response? Death, destruction. They said we were liars and fantasists, stealing precious resources, frittering them away on a dream. They very nearly killed us. Priest's torso floats close. How many died, Keeper? How many died on our ships, which had been built without arms or defenses, because who could have imagined such a brutal, pointless assault? How many died because of them? Keeper looks out the door where Priest's legs are still resting in the spring. A third. Priest nods. 3 million. 3 million of the people dead because of their arrogance. They're evil. But not all of them, Keeper protests. Not every single one is evil. Perhaps, and if that's the case, it is a tragedy. But what's done is done. You saw it yourself. The last message was 50 cycles ago, and those still alive had barely enough to live on as it was. The matter has taken care of itself, has it not? Priest pauses, waiting for a response, and Keeper knows the pause is a challenge, a gauntlet thrown. He carries on regardless. They could still be alive, some of them. Somehow, help should still be offered. Slowly, Priest's eyes slide shut. Oh, I wish you had not said such a thing. The yellow light in their forehead fades. They make another motion of supplication, and the dome melts back into the floor. And as it dissolves, Keeper sees that they are surrounded. Every person that had been in the tabernacle, every novice and acolyte is now gathered. And at the head of this crowd, this mob, stands Aberley. His face is a rictus of frustration and sorrow. We had hoped it would not come to this. Aberley confided in me this morning. I had hoped you would have been one mind with us. We had hoped you would have had the best interests of the people at heart. Keeper doesn't say anything. It takes all his energy to keep from screaming at Aberley. You chose instead the side of a people who are not the people, who do not know the love and grace of the code. I'm sorry for this deception, but I had to know I also needed time to gather assistance, they say, gesturing to the crowd. There was no way that I, even as a priest, could subdue you, who are so beloved and connected to the code. But tragedy begets tragedy, I suppose. I want you to know that no permanent harm will come to you. Your data pertaining to the last 48 hours will be overwritten and reconstituted. You will know that something happened, but not exactly what. We will take. Keeper cuts them off. You misunderstand me. Priest looks at first annoyed and then amused. I'm not sure that there is much to misunderstand. You are advocating that we concede to the degenerates. I did not come to advocate. I came to inform. There is no use trying to deny it, Keeper. Your words were very... Priest trails off, studying Keeper's face. Then horror spreads across their own. You can't mean... You already sent the coordinates. I had all your comm channels squelched the moment Aberley informed me this morning. Do not speak his name, Keeper spits out. But no, I would not make such a betrayal of the people. At that moment, Keeper feels a great shifting in the code. The crowd becomes a sea of murmurs. It seems as if they have felt it too. That was it then, Keeper thinks to himself. The decision, one way or another, has been made. A low rumble, barely audible, sounds beneath their feet. Keeper, what have you done? I prayed. I told the code, the story of the people in Planet 1, of our flight, of the attack, of the numbers killed. I told it everything. And then I fed it the letters, the prayers of Planet 1. I am too weak, too small, too insubstantial to make such a decision, and so I have given it over to the code. I am letting that which sustains and protects us decide. Why? It is not Priest, but Aberley. There's a long, horrible pause, and then Keeper says, I could ask you the same. Aberley at least has the decency to blush and look more than a little anguished. And then, speaking only to Aberley, Keeper says, I needed to know if the code would try to save something that was beyond hope. I needed to know if the code tried for our daughter. The rumble is more distinct now, has grown to a tremor. The crowd, once strong and determined, is now fearful, full of whispers and worry. Keeper, what is the code doing? Someone cries. I cannot be certain, but I believe the deep silos are opening. Interstellar launch is being prepared. But what would be launched? Warheads or shuttles? Was the code sending help to people in need or eradicating a harmful pest? He could find out, could flag his awareness to the optics lining the silo walls and see the shape of the rockets right now. But he decides against it. Decides to stay in his true body to see the decision made by the code with his own meat eyes. Keeper, priest, Aberley, and all the others pour out of the tabernacle into the gardens to get a clear view. After a moment, the rockets become visible, pulsing out of the ground, jerking at uneven intervals. The booms of the pulse engines reach them moments later, as they use spurts of gravity to gain speed and altitude. And their shape? Soft, round shuttles, not the harsh arrowheads of death. The code has chosen compassion. Keeper wants to jump and shout, "Hurrah!" and wave at the rockets, to use his joy and relief to speed them on their way, but all of this strength has been stolen, replaced by gratitude and love and sorrow and a myriad of other unnameable emotions. He sinks to his knees, so happy, so sad. Someone has grabbed a hold of him. Someone is talking. Keeper doesn't listen. He shuts off his audio so that he can drink in the sight of the rockets more absolutely. He is certain that priest is stating his crime, is informing Keeper that there will be a trial, that the penalty for sedition and sacrilege is death. And the code might even allow them to hang him. Its sense of justice is expansive, unknowable. It might feel that going to Planet 1 was the right thing to do, but that setting a test for the code like this was wrong. If that were the outcome, Keeper would be sad, furious even. But he would not be surprised. As they drag him away, he can see Aberley pushing through the crowd to follow, tears streaming. So much sorrow. Aberley is shouting. Keeper turns his audio back on. "She wouldn't have wanted this," Aberley pleads, as if he can convince the Keeper to go back and undo what has already been done. "Our daughter, our beautiful girl. She would have wanted to keep us all safe, to keep you safe." "No." Keeper shakes his head, smiling at the rockets climbing into the heavens. "Our daughter would have been good." What are your thoughts on the story? You can go to the About Us page over on the Clarkesworld Magazine website itself. All of our contact information is listed there should you like to give us some feedback. We have 4 more stories left for you for the month of April, issue 199. I do hope you can come back and listen, should you so choose. And until then, my dear listener, I bid you a very fond and hopefully very, very temporary farewell.